Have you ever caught yourself with your heart racing when the doorbell rings unexpectedly? What if I told you that this seemingly innocent reaction offers a direct window into the deepest layers of your personality? Sigmund Freud recognized over a century ago that nothing in our psychological life happens by chance, not even our aversion to unannounced visitors. In the coming minutes, you'll discover why some people instinctively recoil when someone enters their private sphere. You'll understand how your home becomes a mirror of your soul, and why the fear of visitors often reveals much more about your unconscious fears and desires than you might imagine. Freud taught us that behind every seemingly irrational behavior lies a deeper truth about our inner life. If you're ready to explore the hidden mechanisms of your psyche and understand why your unconscious sometimes says no before your conscious mind can even react, then join us on this fascinating journey into the depths of the human soul. It's an ordinary Sunday afternoon. You're sitting in your favorite chair, perhaps with a cup of coffee in hand, enjoying the peace, when suddenly a shrill ringing shatters this tranquility. Your body reacts immediately, muscles tense, pulse quickens, and a strange feeling of threat spreads through you. Before you even know who's at the door, your unconscious has already decided this is a disturbance, an invasion. Freud would describe this moment as a perfect insight into how our psychological life functions. What happens here is far more than just simple surprise. It's the confrontation between our inner refuge and the outside world, a battle for control, autonomy, and psychological security. When we feel uncomfortable at the thought of unannounced visitors, a fundamental truth about our personality structure reveals itself. Our home isn't just a physical place, it's an extension of our ego, a space where we can remove our masks. Here we are, authentic, uncombed, in comfortable clothes, without the social roles we must otherwise play. The doorbell destroys this illusion of safety. It demands that we switch from our private self to our social self within seconds. This abrupt transition creates stress because it forces us to summon the psychological energy necessary to maintain our public persona. This becomes particularly clear with people whom Freud would have identified as especially sensitive to the boundaries between the ego and the external world. These people have often developed a pronounced awareness of the inviolability of their private space, not from misanthropy, but from a deep understanding of how important it is to have a place where the true self can exist. The reaction to unexpected visitors also reveals something about our relationship with control. People who have difficulty receiving spontaneous visitors are often those who carefully structure their lives. They plan their time, their energy, their emotional resources. An unannounced visitor disrupts this order and confronts them with their own vulnerability. Freud recognized that behind the aversion to surprise visits often lies a deeper fear of losing control. When we don't know who's coming and what's expected, we can't prepare adequately. We're at the mercy of life's spontaneity, and that's a deeply disturbing notion for many people. Yet this reaction isn't pathological, it's human. It shows that we have a healthy awareness of our boundaries and understand how important it is to have spaces where we can be ourselves. The challenge lies in recognizing when this natural protective reaction becomes a paralyzing fear that keeps us from meaningful human connections. Imagine someone opening your diary without warning and beginning to read it. The feeling of violation you'd experience is the same that many people feel when unannounced visitors stand at their door. Our home is nothing more than a three-dimensional diary, a space that reflects our most intimate secrets, habits, and vulnerabilities. Freud understood as one of the first that the physical space we inhabit is inseparably connected to our psychological space. Every object, every corner, every seemingly random arrangement tells a story about our inner life. The way we stack our books, which pictures hang on the walls, even the mess on the kitchen table, all these are traces of our soul that normally only we know how to interpret. When a stranger, or even an acquaintance, unexpectedly enters this space, something fundamental happens. The boundary between private and public blurs. Suddenly, our protected area becomes a stage for social interaction, and we must view our most intimate environment through another's eyes. This shift in perspective can be deeply disturbing. People who react particularly sensitively to unannounced visitors have often developed a refined understanding of the symbolic meaning of their home. They know intuitively that every space they inhabit becomes an extension of their personality. Their bedroom isn't just a place to sleep, it's the space of their dreams, their intimacy, their nightly fears and longings. The kitchen becomes the center of nourishment, not just of the body, but also of the soul. The living room reflects how they want to present themselves to the world. Even the bathroom, this most private of all spaces, tells of their relationship with their own body and their daily rituals of self-care. Freud would argue that the fear of unexpected intruders into these spaces is a natural protective reaction of the ego. The ego, as the mediating instance between our innermost drives and the demands of the external world, instinctively recognizes the danger that lies in the uncontrolled exposure of our private sphere. This insight becomes particularly clear when we observe how differently people react to various types of visits. An announced guest rarely triggers the same panic as a spontaneous visitor, and this has a deep psychological reason. With announced visits, we have the opportunity to prepare our territory, to translate it into a version intended for other eyes. We don't just clean up physically, we clean up psychologically. We hide the traces of our vulnerability, organize our emotional remnants, and create a version of our home that corresponds to our social persona. This preparation isn't superficial, it's an essential process of self-protection. The people who suffer most from unannounced visitors are often those with the richest inner worlds. They've learned to regard their home as a sanctuary, as a place where they can live out their complex personality in all its facets. The disruption of this space feels to them like a disruption of their very soul. Yet Freud also taught us that every psychological reaction has a story to tell. The intensity of our reaction to territorial violations can give us important clues about our deeper fears and desires. It shows us where our most vulnerable spots lie and which aspects of our personality we seek most to protect. Remember back to your childhood. Perhaps a moment when you were completely absorbed in your play with dolls, building blocks, or in a self-created fantasy world, and suddenly an adult stood before you. An uncle, a neighbor, a friend of your parents. How did you feel? Caught? Interrupted? As if something precious had been broken? Freud recognized that our adult reactions to unexpected visitors often have their roots deep in these early experiences. The child within us, who once had to defend their safe play space, lives on in our adult unconscious and colors our present reactions with the emotions of that time. Children who grew up in households where unannounced guests constantly came and went often develop an ambivalent relationship with spontaneous visits. On one hand, they learned that their private space could be interrupted at any time, a lesson that went deep into their personality structure. On the other hand, this often created unconscious strategies of withdrawal and emotional isolation. Particularly formative are the messages children receive about the meaning of privacy. In some families, the need for solitude is interpreted as a sign of rudeness or even selfishness. Don't be so unfriendly. Don't make such a fuss. It's just visitors. Such seemingly harmless sentences can leave deep traces in the child's psyche. The child then learns that their natural boundaries aren't respected, that their needs for peace and withdrawal are less important than the social expectations of adults. This early experience of boundary violation can transform into a lifelong pattern, an excessive vigilance toward potential intruders into one's privacy. Other children grew up in households where visitors were a rare and special affair. For them, every guest became an event requiring great excitement and preparation. These children often developed an association between visits and stress, between social interaction and intense emotional work. Freud would particularly point to the role of parents in these early imprints. How did mother or father react to unexpected visitors? Was there joy and openness, or rather panic and hectic cleaning actions? Children are like emotional seismographs. They register every nuance of parental reactions and store them as blueprints for their own later behavior. A child who witnessed their mother panic when someone unexpectedly rang the doorbell, quickly cleaning the kitchen, hastily changing clothes while appearing stressed and tense unconsciously, learns that unannounced visitors represent a threat. Not rationally, but emotionally, this emotional truth becomes deeply anchored in the unconscious and influences one's own reactions for decades. The situation becomes particularly complex for children who experienced early traumatization by adults. For them, every unexpected intruder into their safe space can trigger an unconscious memory of earlier injuries. Their adult brain may know that the friendly neighbor poses no threat, but their body still reacts with the alarm responses of a wounded child. The good news is that these patterns aren't irreversible. Freud firmly believed in the power of becoming conscious. When we understand where our intense reactions to unexpected visitors come from, we can begin to transform them. We can learn to distinguish between past and present, between the child's fears and the adult's realities. Yet this process requires patience and self-compassion. These childhood patterns once served an important purpose. They protected us from overwhelm and helped us preserve our emotional resources. Understanding them also means honoring them for what they were: survival strategies of a young soul. It's a moment almost everyone knows. The doorbell rings unexpectedly, and the first thought isn't about the visitor, but about one's own state. How do I look? Is the apartment presentable? What will they think? In these few seconds between ringing and door opening, one of humanity's deepest fears reveals itself: the fear of others' judgment. Freud identified this fear as a manifestation of what he called the superego, that psychological instance that carries the voice of society, morality, and expectations within us. The superego is merciless in its judgment and projects our harshest self-criticisms onto others' eyes. When we fear that visitors might judge us, we actually fear our own inner tribunal. This fear manifests on various levels. First, there's the physical level awareness of how we look. Perhaps we're still wearing pajamas, have uncombed hair, or no shoes. For some people, this state of unpreparedness is so shame-laden that they'd rather pretend not to be home than show themselves in their natural, unfiltered form. Then there's the domestic level, the state of our apartment. Are there still breakfast dishes lying around? Are the beds made? Does what the visitor will see correspond to the image we want to convey of ourselves? These questions may seem superficial, but they touch something much deeper: our need for control over the image others have of us. Freud would point out that this concern about external appearance often represents a displacement, a psychological distraction from deeper anxieties. When we worry about whether our home is tidy enough, we might be avoiding the more troubling question: am I good enough as a person? Will I be accepted if seen as I really am? This fear of authentic encounter is particularly strong in people who learned in childhood that love and acceptance are conditional. They've internalized that they're only valuable when they meet certain standards, whether in their appearance, behavior, or living environment. For these people, every unannounced visitor becomes a potential judge deciding their worthiness. They can't simply open the door and say, "Nice to see you, come in." Instead, they experience a whole cascade of self-doubt and shame in mere seconds. Particularly interesting is that this fear of judgment is often completely irrational. Most visitors don't pay attention to the details that concern us so much. They're happy for the invitation to get coffee and have a good conversation. But our superego isn't rational, it's hypervigilant, always ready to warn us of the supposed catastrophe of social rejection. This hypervigilance can go so far as to keep us from spontaneous human encounters. We decline invitations, avoid spontaneous gatherings, and thereby lose valuable opportunities for authentic connections. The irony is bitter. Out of fear of rejection, we create the isolation we actually wanted to avoid. Freud taught us that the first step to healing is recognition. When we understand that our fear of others' judgment often says more about our own internalized standards than about our fellow humans' actual expectations, we can begin to question these standards. Perhaps it's time to ask, whose voice am I really hearing when I fear being judged? Is it the voice of the visitor at my door, or is it the much more critical voice of my own superego that has lived in me for years, evaluating my every step? It's a paradox that lies deep in the heart of human nature. We long for connection, for closeness, for the warm feeling of being understood and seen, and simultaneously we recoil when this connection enters our lives too suddenly, too unexpectedly. Freud recognized in this contradiction one of the most fundamental conflicts of the human psyche, the struggle between the need for intimacy and protection from intrusion. When the doorbell rings and we inwardly flinch, something fascinating happens. Two opposing forces within us wrestle with each other. There's the part of us that rejoices in human company, that perhaps has even felt loneliness and yearns for exchange. And there's the other part that instinctively defends the boundaries of our private refuge, that senses our carefully balanced emotional equilibrium might be disturbed. This tension isn't pathological, it's deeply human. Freud would understand it as an expression of our fundamental dilemma. We are social beings who need solitude and solitary beings who need society. Both needs are legitimate, both are necessary for our psychological well-being. People who react particularly sensitively to unannounced visitors often have a refined perception of the quality of interpersonal energy. They sense intuitively that every encounter requires an exchange not just of words, but of emotional presence, attention, psychological energy. And sometimes they simply don't have the resources for this exchange. This is especially relevant for people Freud would describe as highly sensitive, those who receive the emotional currents of their environment like antennae. For them, an unexpected visitor can represent not just a social challenge, but a real energetic overwhelm. They must regulate not only their own emotions, but also absorb and process the guests. Here, the wisdom of our instinctive defense reveals itself. It doesn't protect against people themselves, but against the wrong timing of human encounters. There are moments when we're open to connection, inwardly ready for the emotional exchange that every genuine encounter brings. And there are other moments when we must first rediscover this openness. Freud taught us that true intimacy is always based on voluntariness. When we feel pressured into sociability, when we have no choice about the timing of the encounter, then even the most well-meaning gesture can be experienced as intrusion. The difference between intimacy and intrusion doesn't lie in the visitor themselves, but in our inner state of readiness. This insight can be liberating. It means we're not automatically unfriendly or antisocial when we sometimes feel overwhelmed by spontaneous visits. It means we have a healthy sense of our own boundaries and understand when we have the emotional capacity for authentic encounter and when we don't. At the same time, Freud warns us against the danger of making this natural protective mechanism into a general avoidance strategy. If we're always too busy, too tired, or too unprepared for human encounters, we deprive ourselves of opportunities for the connections we actually long for. The art lies in learning to distinguish between moments when our defense protects us from overwhelm and those moments when it holds us back from the possibility of true connection. Sometimes the doorbell is indeed a disturbance, and sometimes it's an invitation to an encounter that could enrich our lives. The key lies in self-perception. Am I reacting from momentary overwhelm or from a deep-seated fear of closeness? Is my resistance a healthy protection of my boundaries or a barrier that isolates me from the world? These questions require honesty with oneself, but they open the path to a more conscious handling of our need for both solitude and connection. True transformation begins with a moment of honesty with yourself. The next time you hear the doorbell and feel your body tense, pause for a moment. Don't ask yourself, "Why am I so rude?" Instead, ask, "What do I need right now to feel safe?" Freud believed that every neurotic reaction carries a core of wisdom within it. Your defense against unexpected visitors isn't a flaw you need to correct. It's a signal from your unconscious trying to tell you something important about your current needs. The art lies in understanding this signal without being dominated by it. The first step to healing is acknowledgement. You have the right to have boundaries. You have the right to moments of undisturbed peace, to times when you're not available for others' emotional needs. Respecting these boundaries isn't selfish. It's a prerequisite for authentic relationships. Imagine you could go to the door with the same friendliness with which you'd greet an expected guest and honestly say, "How wonderful to see you. I'm having a difficult day and not in the best shape. Would you like to come back tomorrow, or do we have time for just a brief conversation?" This honesty would not only respect your own needs, but also give your visitor the opportunity to respond appropriately. Most people appreciate authenticity more than perfect hospitality. An honest, "Today isn't the best day," is often received with more understanding than a forced smile with inattention. When we stop acting, we also give others permission to be genuine. Freud taught us that awareness is the first step to change. Begin observing your patterns. When do you feel particularly threatened by unannounced visitors? After stressful workdays, when you feel emotionally vulnerable, when your home doesn't meet your standards. These observations are valuable data about your psychological landscape. Over time, you can learn to distinguish between different types of resistance. Is it the healthy exhaustion after a long day that needs rest? Or is it the old fear of evaluation that prevents you from being seen? The first resistance deserves respect. The second deserves gentle challenge. A practical exercise. Imagine your best friend standing unannounced at your door. How would you react? Probably with joy, despite unmade beds or unwashed cups. This reaction shows you that the problem isn't unannounced visits themselves, but your relationship with certain people and your fears about their judgments. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of gently reprogramming old reaction patterns. Perhaps you begin by consciously cleaning less when expecting announced visitors, or you consciously invite people who are allowed to see you in your imperfect, authentic form. These small steps build the confidence that you're lovable even unprepared. Remember, the most beautiful encounters often arise spontaneously. The conversations that truly touch us rarely take place in perfectly prepared spaces. They emerge in the kitchen over a hasty cup of coffee, in pajamas at the kitchen table, in moments of unfiltered humanity. True hospitality doesn't begin with the perfect home or flawless appearance. It begins with the willingness to allow yourself and others to be human. When you give yourself this permission, you'll find that even unannounced visitors lose their terror, not because you've changed, but because you've allowed yourself to be as you are. What we've explored together today is more than just the psychology of unexpected visits. We've glimpsed into the deepest layers of your personality and discovered how your seemingly irrational reactions are actually wise messages from your unconscious. Freud taught us that nothing in our psychological life happens by chance, not even your tension when the doorbell rings. You've learned that your home is an extension of your ego, that your childhood experiences shape your present reactions, and that the fear of others' judgment often reflects the voice of your own critical superego. You've understood that the conflict between intimacy and intrusion is a natural part of human experience, and that you have the right to respect your boundaries without shame. But the most important insight is this: authentic hospitality doesn't begin with perfect preparation, but with the willingness to allow yourself and others to be human. When you give yourself this inner permission, what was once a threat transforms into a possibility for genuine connection? What hidden truth about your relationship with closeness and distance could change your life if you fully acknowledged it? Let us know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. We're always fascinated by the global community, interested in the secrets of human psychology. If this insight into your inner life was valuable to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Your comments and reflections not only enrich our discussion, but also show how universal these human experiences are. Thank you for being part of this journey into the depths of the soul. Until next time, when we again explore together the hidden truths of the human heart.